Ready to get your spirit in shape? My name is Joe Iovino with United Methodist Communications, and for the next 30 minutes or so, I invite you to listen along as we hear ideas to keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. Today's conversation is with the Reverend R. Scott Miller. Scott's a pastor in Ohio who has a website called TechnoPreach, where he shares ways that pastors and churches can use technology to enhance their ministries. In this conversation, I asked him about how those of us who aren't pastors can use technology and social media to grow in our discipleship, and he had some really innovative ideas. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I'm joined today in the studio by the Reverend R. Scott Miller, the Associate Pastor of Gaines United Methodist Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. Reverend Miller has served in youth ministry and Christian education for more than 20 years in New Jersey, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. He's written curriculum, and he's created new worship services, and so much more. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, nice to see you, Joe.
But in addition to the impressive resume, Scott and I have been friends for
over 20 years.
Yeah, I looked it up the other day. I think it's since 92.
Yeah,
you came to New Jersey in 92, and you were the youth pastor of my home church, so we kind of got to know each other.
Well, your mom was a secretary and an office administrator.
Yeah, I was long gone, but I popped in, and we used to go to lunch together, and you introduced me to a lot of cool music that I didn't know before, so we had a lot of fun doing those things. So as we catch up today, tell me a little bit about your appointment to Gaines United Methodist Church there in Cincinnati and plans you have going forward.
Well, I had been at a church for 13 years in the suburbs of Cincinnati doing youth ministry and program ministry, but the church was making some changes. And a very, very dear friend of mine, it was the pastor at Gaines United Methodist Church, they were making changes. They were a family-based church that realized they needed to be reaching out to the community and wanted to make some drastic changes. So in 2013, the crazy idea came for me to go and serve part-time at my church and part-time at the church at Gaines. Now, the unique part about all of that is that Gaines is a historically Black United Methodist church. It's in a community that is very diversely mixed, but the church was primarily African American with a few white folks scattered in every once in a while. They already had a midweek meal devotional going on that was hit or miss, and they wanted to create a contemporary worship on Sunday morning, which is unique in itself because in the white church, we learned contemporary worship from the African-American churches.
Right.
And what they wanted to do was create a service that was brief. If you're familiar with African-American church, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. The service was created to be an hour to hour and 15 minutes long, to have a contemporary feel with a nod to tradition. And I had no idea what I was doing. I'd created many worship services, but not in that context. We were intentional about creating a band that was multicultural. We were intentional about creating music that had a nod every which way. And it has grown the church along with the midweek service, what's become a midweek service and meal. So we've increased worship from 140 in worship a week to 235 last year.
Wow. So things are going well.
Yes.
They're going really well. Very good. So, and as long as I've known you, you've been the tech guy. I mean, I remember asking you questions back when I got my first computer, I think, and when I first got my first tablet, I talked to you about how to use it for worship. And now you're using those abilities in a new way with this blog, Facebook page, this community you've built called TechnoPreach. And you're going to find it at facebook.com/TeknowPreach. We will post that on our page at umc.org/podcasts so people can find out about that. But tell me about TechnoPreach. Tell me about what's happening there.
The tagline with TechnoPreach is where technology and ministry reach out together. Back when I first started, it was more about technology. And where I've changed and where I'm at in ministry, it kind of changed what I was doing. I went from being the youth pastor and technology guy to really realizing that my heart is in pastoral ministry.
Okay.
In fact, what that transition is even becoming from me being a deacon in the United Methodist Church to transitioning to elders' orders, my ordination, which is very unique.
Yes.
So what I wanted to do is recreate this TechnoPreach idea and to helping to kind of marry technology and the church, along with not just for pastors, for lay people, and give opportunities. We do a daily meme that is based on a theologian for a month. Theologian or writer. I should clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
We do that so that it's something to look at, think about, and pass on. During Lent, we're doing a 40-day study where every day the scripture is posted and it's shared. It's been shared a lot.
Great.
And it's a great way to. That's just what I'm doing is giving examples of how to do it, how to marry technology and church. We've got content from a friend of mine, Tony Walker, in Birmingham, Alabama, who, whether he realizes it or not, is a street comedian and is a blast to work with. I've known him for a couple years now. I've got a young man named Nick Frederico who's getting ready to start writing some articles on communicating, how the church can communicate out into the world, whether it's crisis communication or ways of communicating that are different. And it's something that not just for pastors, but for laity to make use of, because the church needs to be driven by the laity with resourcing and getting the word out.
Right. Well, the thing that strikes me is we use our computers for keeping up with a lot of things. I mean, I'm on almost every day trying to see what's going on in the news with the election cycle. The local news is there if something happens in town and I want to know what happened. Even to keep up with my high school friends on Facebook or whatever's going on. I use it for news and information, but sometimes we forget that there's devotional ways to use our technology. What are some of the ways that you've found?
Well, and that's really funny because I quit doing my memes. I was doing those just on my personal page and had taken a break from it. After I'd been away from it for a year, I started getting people reposting because with Facebook you get the memories and where they had,
Right.
And so they saw them again and started reposting. And then one guy kept saying, I wish our Scott Miller would start doing this again. And kept seeing those popping up. And I was like, I had something that I didn't realize. And that's why I started recreating that. And it's amazing how something that you do for your own personal devotional takes and captures other people. And so I didn't realize my impact until a year after I quit and realized it was something I needed to get back into in a serious way.
Right. Do you use the electronic media for your own devotional stuff?
It's a mixed bag. Bag. I do, especially because different people are posting different things. Lately, I've been doing it a little bit more because at our church we're doing a study on a book, and it's been kind of an online Facebook conversation Bible study, and it's pulled in a lot of different people, and I've been part of that for the fact that it's been harder for me to be in a real space-time situation because of some travel and some other things going on. And I'm connected back to the community because of that.
Excellent. That's a wonderful way to do that. One of the things that you've talked about doing at Gaines is that you've created this social media presence. And when we were talking earlier, you were surprised kind of by what's happened at Gaines, that this community, other than the face-to-face community, this complete online community has popped up. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, when I first got to Gaines, Facebook was very underutilized. They had two pages, one which was a prayer page, which was actually more active, but it wasn't a page, it was more of a group.
Okay.
And then they had a church page. When I looked, the church page had 40 likes. And just every once in a while something was posted, not real often, no different than any other church. And I just took it upon myself to maybe go a different direction. And so I started, first off, inviting every friend and neighbor that I knew to join, along, including the church community. Then my senior pastor at the time started doing the same thing. And we were being very intentional about telling the story of what was going on during the week. And it would start out with a teaser about the sermon. And then different posts through the week and different things coming up from different people or commentary from within the church. Then it would come to Sunday morning, and we would be videotaping it at the time on tablets. And now we actually have a videographer doing it and doing a little bit better job than what I did.
Right.
But we also had some folks in the church that would kind of mini blog or microblog during the service.
Okay.
And they would be making posts all the way through, and then people would start having a conversation back and forth both during and after the service. And it still goes, it's a natural piece. I don't plan it. And it depends on how the sermon is hitting. And certain folks will just start chiming in, and it's amazing conversation going on that sometimes will carry on throughout the week.
Right.
But what caught us off guard, and when we realized we had something, was almost a year ago to last couple weeks.
Okay.
We had a gentleman come in who I know from walking the streets of Cincinnati, Madisonville. He just hangs out. He does odd jobs. And he was coming to church, and the pastor kind of bumped into him, greeting him on the way in, and out of Chris's pocket fell out his big can of beer.
Okay.
And the pastor picked up Chris. I'm sorry, Pastor. And he said, no problem. He said, well, Pastor, I'm just going to stick it out here. And he left it under one of the bushes.
Kind of outside. He didn't want to bring it into the church.
He didn't want to bring it.
Okay.
Now that everybody knew that he had it.
Right.
Well, the pastor went and got it, and he said, Chris, keep this. You're going to lose it.
Right.
And he said, well, Pastor, I just came this morning to get a cup of coffee, to be prayed for and hear a word. And what happened out of it was a picture of the two of them basically the three of them, the two of them in the beer.
Okay.
and then the beer ended up being included in the sermon. Oh. And we wrote a story about it. That week we had 7,000 hits.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it struck us. And then we started looking and realizing at the time we had about 350 likes on the page. Now there's over 500 likes on the page.
And what do you attribute that to?
Telling the story.
Okay.
I've seen too much Facebook and social media used just to advertise and promote. Mm-hmm. And what we did was we changed it. And I'm not going to say the pastor. But the scripture, the passage for that week ends up being the story. And we're telling the story throughout the week in a unique way until it comes out as a sermon. And then you still have the story continuing from the feedback and follow-up after the sermon.
Okay.
And so it's a 7 or 8 day news cycle, if you want to use that,
right,
of storytelling.
Okay.
And it's captured some people. We've gotten visitors and guests to church because of it. It's just something that really we walked into, and now we realize we've got an idea, and it's working.
So I see how a church staff could use that, right? So they can tell the story of the church. How could individual members of any congregation tell the story of their church?
In reality, even though the staff initiated it, it's lay people that drive it. You know, it's lay people that keep inviting their friends to like the page. They share. When something special happens, they share it. My bloggers, my microbloggers are just members of the church. I have to tease a friend of mine who is one of our members, Jana. She just took one of those spiritual gift inventories, and proclamation came out as one of the big ones. And we were talking, she said, well, I'm not a preacher. I said, yeah, you are. I said, you preach on Facebook all the time.
Right.
And she really is. She's telling the story. She's sharing the grace and gospel every week through her blogs, many blogs, posts. She writes prayers up there, and it just continues the story.
So this is a kind of a way we can use Facebook for something other than what we normally do. Rather than putting up a picture of your meal or the kids or whatever else is going on, but to use it as I want to say disciple-making tool or a sharing tool.
Well, and part of it came out of my journalism background. I've got a minor in journalism. And it was one of those where I always thought, well, what's this have to do with church?
The journalism.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then now I realize it has a lot to do, because if we're not telling the story outside of the church, what chance do we have of bringing people in?
Right. But what about, I think I hear you saying, is that every member of the congregation has a story to tell.
And has the opportunity to tell.
Right, and now has the opportunity. And it's not necessarily the story of your church. It could be the story of your journey. It could be the story of just the story of God, the story of Christ. Your spiritual experience is a story worth telling and sharing.
Right, and it's bled into this new Bible study we're doing, our book study, I should say.
Yeah, tell me about that.
We're doing a book study on Draw of a Circle, 40-day prayer challenge by Mark Batterson. In conversations with a few of us, we realized that not everybody's going to be in a group of people. They don't have time. And this summer, we attempted a book study, and I have to admit it failed miserably. And part of it was that I was the one in charge. That's why I'm going to say that's why it failed, because in the midst of it, we had a crisis event in the community. We had a pastoral change. I had some personal issues that came up, and I couldn't keep up with it.
Okay.
And it never really flew off the ground like we wanted. Well, one of our church members, James Stallworth, saw the opportunity with this study and just posted on his own Facebook page, "I'm starting this group. Who wants to come and be part of it?" We've got 28 members in the group. It's a private group, but it keeps growing.
Sure.
And it's every day. James takes the time, and besides reading the daily piece from the book, he sits down and writes his own journal.
A little commentary?
Yeah. And instead of, it's basically what he would be writing in his journal, he's just writing it for everybody. It's vulnerable, it's personable, and it's relational. And we end up having anywhere from 8 to 15, I think the largest was 15 responses back and forth in a conversation. Actually, one keeps going, so I've lost track on that one. and it keeps going, and the conversation it keeps going, and you can see people's eyes opening, even though we're not in person.
But is there a trick to that? Because I know a lot of times we'll write posts. I mean, I put posts on my Facebook page, and you do it on yours.
Yes.
And nobody responds. I mean, it's crickets, and you don't know where this is going. Or you get responses that are so off topic from what you intended, right? It gets interpreted in especially if it's somebody else's article and somebody picks on something different than I picked up on, and it goes off in a direction I never expected. Is there a trick to kind of writing a post that invites, or creating this community, that you're inviting community and not just spewing? So much of Facebook is just spewing.
You're right.
So how do you get people to turn this into a conversation?
I think the reason why this is working is it's not one of the pastors. That's one of the pieces.
Because the expectation of a pastor is to teach.
Right.
The expectation of another member is to have a conversation.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Exactly. Now, that being said and done, Pastor Don Wilson and I are both members of that group.
Sure.
But we also both preface by saying we are not here as the pastors. We're here as part of the conversation. And we've both been intentional about chiming in and being part of the conversation, but not leading the conversation.
Right.
And I think that has done the biggest drive in it by us not being the drivers, having a layperson who is saying, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm putting myself out there and letting everybody just jump in with me.
Yeah.
And let's all jump in the pool together.
It just strikes me as you're having this conversation that, and being the Methodist nerd that I am, is that it has this quality of the very earliest parts of the Methodist movement. When John Wesley put these classes and bands and societies together, there were leaders, but the leader was a participant. It wasn't a clergy person.
Exactly.
So this is this kind of a 21st century electronic model of something that's 300 years old.
Well, and the funny thing is, my friend James grew up in a Baptist background. He's new to Wesleyan theology, and he's dead on. He's dead on in style. He's dead on in the way he's doing it. If John Wesley was around today, this is one of the formats we would have.
Sure.
I have no doubt.
Do you think the closed group helps?
Yes. In fact, one of the very earliest posts, one of the persons started being really exposing herself, and she went, I hope this is a closed post or a closed
Right.
group.
Okay.
And James was quick to respond, yes, it is.
Okay.
And we needed to. We knew we needed to. But we do keep inviting friends and people that we think that could be part of the conversation.
But it does control the spammers, and it controls the trollers that are going to say something nasty. So
Correct. And here's the part that just blows me away, is more than half of the group is not members of the church.
That's the part that gets my attention.
Yeah.
That this is not just another way of getting church people in the conversation. This is a way of getting those outside of the church, at least your local church, involved in the conversation.
Right. And most of them, the way I'm reading the commentary, have gone and bought the book. They're bought into the study as much as anybody within the church.
Right.
And we've got over 100, we've got probably closer to 150 people in small groups right now.
Wow.
When you add this group,
yeah,
because as a church, we want to be on one page. Mm-hmm. Helps when it's a smaller church and, everybody's really tight, but it's also a smaller church that's growing.
Right.
And they're wanting to grow together.
I imagine there's limits to digital community.
There is, but I want to say that in my first response, there is. But so many people have smartphones. And I work in a community, my walking community around a church is not the wealthiest community at all.
Okay.
It's an inner city urban, I call it an urban suburb. It's not quite downtown Cincinnati. It's right on the edges. But even folks that don't have a lot of money have a smartphone.
Right.
And they're tied into Facebook because they want to know what's going on. They're nosy.
Yeah. Can I ask you, though, too, do you get a sense of the age of the people that you're... Because a lot of times we assume social media is young people, right? Where this is what we would use with our youth group. But my sense is Facebook is not a youth group tool anymore.
No, it's not.
Who's coming into this Facebook community? What are the ages of the people?
My favorite person is a woman in our church. And I'm not going to guess her age, and she's going to give me all sorts of grief later on.
We don't
and
have to tell her. We'll just keep it quiet. Well,
no, she's proud of her age, and for me not saying it. But she is Facebook crazy in a good way. Uh-huh. She digs into my posts. She'll give me grief if she thinks I'm a little off.
Oh, good. Okay.
And she doesn't get out much. She is home. In fact, because of Facebook, I found her dog, which is the craziest story, because somebody in the community had to get rid of their dog. She saw it, fell in love with the pictures, and adopted this dog. And that is her outreach. Her ministry is Facebook.
Right. Okay.
And she may not get to church very often.
Yeah. Okay. How's she using Facebook in ministry?
Affirming. She goes and affirms people. She if you do a post, if it has something to do with spirituality or not, you can be guaranteed if you're a friend of hers, she will not just read it. If it catches her eye, she'll make a comment. And they're great comments, and they're encouraging. I've had really, really cruddy days, and she has posted something on my page that has gotten me moving.
Yeah.
And that's her ministry. She is doing ministry out of her house through Facebook, through social media.
And so we're not talking about 12 and 15-year-olds. We're talking about 55 plus, 65 plus.
I'm saying my grouping, if I could figure out the ages in the Facebook community, which we're over 500 at Gaines, is between 40 and 90.
Yeah. I just find that we make these assumptions sometimes that just don't play out in the real world. I have a question about the microblogging, which I go to conferences. In fact, we had a learning thing here recently, and people were tweeting about what was happening, right? Yeah. And so even the leader saw it because he was pegged in it, and so it popped up on his feed that he had been mentioned, and so he actually could respond to that. But that requires us taking our phones and our tablets out in church. You're a preacher.
Yeah.
If I take my phone out while you're preaching, you okay with that?
I am now.
Okay.
When I was starting out and when all these smartphones were going out, I was preaching at a youth and young adult service. Mm-hmm. So I always wondered, okay, what video game were they playing while I'm preaching? But now I'm seeing a whole different level. I'm seeing, they're surfing Facebook. There's some people when I see them out. But more often than not, when I see somebody typing and I realize they just blogged, they just did a post.
So if I want to do that, if I want to go to my church, which you and I are not connected that way. So if I wanted to go to my church and do that, should I ask the pastor about that, you think, and just kind of let him know, or just take my phone out and go for it?
It depends on the pastor. It depends. Okay. But in reality, you're going to do it anyway. People do it. They get curious. They want to see what's going on around them, even in church.
Sure.
And we multitask so much. We're in an ADD society where sometimes people listen better when they're doing something else.
That's true.
So I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem when the phones go off, ring, or the text noises go off. But in my church, which is a micro version of all this, I see it being very edifying and very uplifting because I see the results of it.
Right. So it's worth doing.
I think so. It brings people into conversation. Something's going on at a church when you're seeing active posts.
Absolutely.
In fact, we had one family come back to church because they kept seeing this and they wanted to know what was going on.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's very cool.
So it changed their perspective of what they thought was a stodgier church, realizing it's anything but.
Okay. Well, back to my Wesleyan stuff again.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about kind of the acts of piety in the language that we use in the United Methodist Church, meaning those devotional things. We can use Facebook for Bible reading and for hearing those quotes and doing that kind of stuff, the kind of cerebral internal stuff. But can we move over to that other side where we're doing those acts of mercy, or how can the social media, the technology help us in that way?
We had a perfect example of that in my community. In June, we had a police officer killed within blocks of the church.
Wow.
It was right in the week of the clergy moving, and our pastor was getting ready to move. New pastor was getting ready to come in. And the current pastor at the time, Pastor Cornell Graham, actually went on the scene while I was doing crisis communication from the church.
Okay.
And we decided that we can't sit still. And so we sent out a post that we're meeting at 5 o'clock to have a time of prayer and a time of feedback about what's going on. We had 25, 26 people show up. Some of them were from other churches, other Methodist churches in the community, which just warmed my heart to no end because they were concerned about their sister United Methodist Church that was in the middle of this.
Fantastic, yeah.
The next step was about, I'm going to say 3 weeks later, we had what we called a concert of prayer. And what our intention was to line that street for at least a block. When we ended up covering 2 blocks, we had between 250 and 350 people show up. We posted it on Facebook. It got reposted. It got picked up by the press. We had people show up because they saw the posts that were on Facebook and wanted to come and pray for the community of Madisonville.
Wow.
And what was going on, pray for healing.
Yeah.
And it just blew my mind. It helped me realize how powerful our social media was.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen this, obviously not in a situation quite so dire as that, but I've seen, and I would suggest to people, follow your local food bank, follow.
Yes.
I know there's some communities, when I lived in Colorado Springs, there was I think they called it 1 minute missions, which was not that you did missions in a minute, but that in 1 minute, it was time to go. So they would just kind of do the immediate, we're going to go do something. Do you want to come along and join us? There's lots of follow your police department, follow your fire department, whatever's around. And they will often alert you to ways you can serve the community. So it's just another way of doing that. I mean, the prayer is a fantastic way to get those things together. But I think there's just a lot of opportunity. Unfortunately, that's mostly news. You're just getting the news and then you go and do it. But you also talked about your friend who's a little bit older, who is serving people.
Mrs. Tyson, yes.
Yeah, who's serving people in a very real concrete way through social media with the encouraging word or whatever that is, that she's serving, not being served. It's just this is fun stuff, and I think you and I could do this for a really long time.
We could easily.
But our time is getting short. And so any final thoughts that you want to encourage us to get involved in social media, or how we can use social media to further our spiritual development?
We just need to tell the story. We need to make use of it not as information, but as storytelling. Because when you tell the story, then people want to be actively in the story and be actively part of the story, not just be spectators.
Yeah. It's no fluke that Jesus was the master storyteller.
That's
because
right.
it involves us, it hooks us, and
That's right.
and draws us in. And you have a story to tell, right? Every one of us has
We
a story
all
to
have a
tell.
story, and that's why it's not just the pastors, it's the laity.
Because you're the expert in your own story.
That's right.
You may not be the Bible expert, you may not be the theological expert, but you're the expert of your own story and the way God has worked in your life. And so that's
right.
something worth sharing. That's something to tell other people about.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. We good?
We're good.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. I am
Thank
really
you.
glad that we did this today.
That's
I've
fun.
been talking with Reverend R. Scott Miller. I want you to check out his Facebook page at TechnoPreach. And again, we'll put that link on umc.org/podcasts, where you'll find a page for this podcast, a great picture of Scott, and we'll get you hooked up with those resources and to get connected in your devotional life on Facebook and in other places. So thanks for being with us today. My name's Joe Iovino with United Methodist Communications. Peace.